Okay, welcome back. So now we're into the part of the figure where we're going to be dealing, drawing portion now with light, value, edges, and contrast, and specifically the block-in, or what I also called, what we called in art school, the mop-in. All right, now you might be wondering, okay, why do I have Oreo cookies set up here? Well, I like them from time to time, but I want to use them as a little way to reinforce this idea. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to try not to eat them on camera. I might actually, we'll see, but I don't want to talk with my mouth full. So I'm going to open up this Oreo cookie bag, and I want to show you something to reinforce the idea of the block-in and the mop-in. All right, so let's get one that's not broken. Okay, so I'll set the others over. So what you notice is you got a beautiful, tasty Oreo cookie, okay? And then I'll try to open it perfectly. So we see this idea where we have the dark chocolatey area, right? And you have the cream or the vanilla, and you have the dark chocolate again. So what do we have here? We have dark against light, right? And then against dark again. So dark, light, and so on and so forth. And we could go on with that. It's just like a nice Oreo cookie. So drawing the block-in or the mop-in, either one, is like an Oreo cookie. And they're kind of tasty too, although I bet your drawings are not as tasty as an Oreo cookie. So I'm going to set that now to the side a little bit. I'm going to try not to eat it. And so this whole idea of, we've got, make sure I'm in camera here, the idea of the block-in, okay, and or what I call two, is also the mop-in. And those of you that have cleaned floors like I used to do when I was a student and had a job, construction job, etc., mopping. But it's a broad, what all of this means is a broad approach to laying in value and separating light and value into very easy, readable chunks of either a shadow side or a light side. Shadow, light versus shadow. And we trap the light, and when we do that by darks on both sides, we illuminate the lighter section. So that's the point of this video, is to make this clear. So let's do a little refresher before we draw the figure some to show us what the block-in means. So I'll use a couple of just forms and objects here, right? The sphere, okay? And then we'll use next door here, we'll use a little cylinder here. Okay, this is very rudimentary and a refresher, which most of you know. Most students especially, but also YouTube land. You probably do, but it's important to just kind of review this, and then maybe kind of a blocky form, maybe going in this direction. Okay, here, and then over rectangular kind of block. Okay, kind of the basics of drawing any form, no matter what you're drawing, even also sometimes abstractly. So we have that going back into space as well there. Okay, so we have all that. Now, again, this idea of the mop-in or the block-in. So let's analyze a little bit, and we'll put these each on a little table. So we have a table here, just in the background, so it has something to sit on. Here, back here a little bit. Yeah, that feels pretty good. And I'm using a big charcoal stick. You could use anything you want in your sketchbooks, your notebooks, etc. So we want to analyze where a light source is coming from. So for all these, I'm going to have the light source seemingly out here, shining on to the object. So this way coming in, and also in front of, so up above and slightly in front of the objects. And that's going to push the cast shadow. So the first thing is we're going to, before block-in, we're going to lay in our shadow patterns, and that's still a linear approach. So we're going to lay in here, right, and we're going to analyze the cast shadows. Because we're in front a little bit, okay, we're going to, the light's in front and high, the shadows will go back somewhat this way, okay? Our form shadow lay-in will be about right in through here, a little bit of a shadow here on this lip, and then the cast shadow will be back and behind a little bit, right in through here. Okay, and then same thing for the block is we're coming from above, slightly to front left, and we have a little bit different situation since we have these 90-degree plane changes. So this will be our brightest form, our hottest form, and number 2 will receive medium light. Number 3 will receive the darkest light. And the cast shadow will come back in the same kind of way here. Probably more like that. Seems a little cleaner. Back in through here. And that feels pretty good for just a lay-in. So that's still the lay-in. So now what we're looking for in the block-in is to go back to our tasty Oreo cookie idea, right? Doesn't that look good? Maybe, maybe not. Is this whole idea of separating light and dark into 2 really easy, readable value systems. Trust me, I know that things are we're going to get very complex as we go through the light, value, edges, and contrast. But in the beginning, we want to ease our brain and our eye together and read just 2 simple values, a lighter side versus a darker side, or a sandwich, dark against light, back against dark, to help illuminate, especially on a lighter surface like a white piece of drawing paper. Okay, so in some sense that looks like this, right? Okay, and maybe that'll be too dark, but I'll just make an idea here against this, right? There's a contrast, a value, and also against this. So we're trapping like a sandwich, okay? We're trapping in the light by values around it. That's a block-in or a mop-in. Now let's do it on the object. Now we're generally not going to go as dark as an Oreo cookie. I don't want to go too dark. About number 5, I'll put a big 5 here on the value scale. It's a good place to start. Later on, as you get more advanced and become a big-time pro, right, you can do whatever you want and need. But for now, let's keep it to about a number 5 in the value scale. So as we block in, we're going to lay in just the simple value shape of the shadow shape of our object. The cast shadow and the form shadow, we're going to group them all together. Okay, and that's it. That's your block in. That's your mop in. That's your block in. Okay, now if you really want to get fancy later on, you can also block in your atmosphere back here. Okay, and so that will all be the same value, but you've got to be careful to keep your edge. That's going to be a little bit harder of your object. So all the objects have a molecular boundary, right? So we won't talk about atoms, we'll just talk molecules. And so they are made up of molecules in one sense, and so we have a boundary. Generally, a crisper edge will help illustrate that boundary, so we can block in all of this. Now, do you see we have a pattern going? A dark against a light, against a dark, back to a light one. Same thing with your Oreo cookie or your Hydrox. Used to call these Hydrox, different company, I think. So dark against a light, back against a dark, and we have a contrast. This is just more contrasting than we want here, because later on we're going to add coarse shadow to make reflected light, and it will be much more complex in our cookie. Okay, so let's do the block in over here. So a block in, we've got our lay in or mop in. So when I call it mop in too, if I'm drawing with a pencil, right, okay, the pencil tip, the broad tip on the side, or if I'm drawing with a nice charcoal stick, it's very broad. I can do that and really get it all mopped in no time. We don't want to be so labor intensive. So that's a mop in. Look how easy I mopped in or blocked in that value. Don't stop there. Hit your cast shadow. Okay, so this is a cast shadow, that's a form shadow, and now we can do the same thing over here, okay, and block in the atmosphere. Bring that atmosphere up to the edge of your object. Try not to leave a halo, okay, around your form. Some people do that. They do this. They come over here and they kind of do that, and they're like, Do I bring it against the edge? Yeah, you do, because you can block in and run your block in value inside your form, and you can get them all together and just catch your edge a little bit here. So again, dark against light, against dark. I'll put a little form shadow there. And we have the beginnings of elimination. And this is going to turn your figure drawing into a very manageable light and dark value arrangement that will add coarse shadow to that, and it will just come alive in no time. Okay. Now over here, the light source is from above and a little bit to the left and a little bit in front. Out here, shining down where my hand is out here. That's how I'm imagining it. So we have a 9-degree angle here. That's light, medium, and dark. So we're going to keep the 2 and 3 sides the same because we don't want to add anything more than this in our mop in and or our block in. So we're going to group all this together like we've done here and here. Okay, and then we're going to block and mop in the cast shadow along with all of that. And taking great pains to just catch the edge here, catch the edge there. Make sure we have it. You don't have to have a tough, strong, dark, deep line, okay? Just enough to show you the edge change and it's still the form, right? It's all the same value, okay? It's a number 5 on that value scale, right in the middle from light and dark, okay? Here's absolute light. Here's absolute dark, right? And we're about right there, right in the middle is number 5, right through there. That's a nice, good range, because later on we're going to add, again, coarse shadow. And of course I can block in or mop in my atmosphere. Maybe I can do more, you know, the table can be mopped into, and it can be darker than just a white table. I generally just try to keep it a white table. We can block them in. See, that gives you an atmosphere in no time. Okay? And I'll show you different materials, pen and some ink pen, Progresso pencil, charcoal, maybe a little graphite, and this really all works for the same thing. It's not media dependent, so it's a concept of block in, right, and or mop in. We call it the same kind of thing, and it's the separation of light and dark values like an Oreo cookie, so we can see the beginnings of contrast, and your mind can really begin to relate to what we see. Because the next step really is to, and that's another video, but I'll add just to this one, is to add the coarse shadow, the darkest part of the shadow that turns the form from flatter kind of circular form into 3D, and look how that gives you 3 dimensions. That's going to be another video. We're going to work on block ends in the figure. Okay, so that's the rudimentary part of it. Now let's get really more complex and go on to figure poses, and we'll slow this down so you can see that. Okay, all right. So now I'm going to go and start to enjoy my Oreo cookies, and you can go get some if you like, and I'll see you then. All right, bye-bye. All right, so now as we're started past Cookie Monster there into the real thing. So I'm going to show you, we're going to go through several steps of drawing the figure, and I'm going to show you the simple rudiments of blocking in light and dark value with the figure, and show you how it's just like working with still life objects, and also that the concept of that Oreo cookie with just a dark and just a light. So you'll see me now going through all the stages of action and gesture with the design line, and I'll work the alignment beam, and we'll locate the positions of our major groupings of forms, and I'll flesh out the contours of the figure. And then we're going to find the shadow shapes of the model. And once we locate linearly the shadow shapes of the model, and then we're going to mop in or block in the shadow shapes with just really one simple value. And we're going to keep it, again, very, very simple. Try to be as clear as possible with that. So working that curve through with the gesture of the figure here, and as we find those shadow shapes, which might be the most difficult, then we're going to mop in with that value tone that's about a number 5 on the value scale. So not too dark and not too light, and we can change all that later on as we get deeper into
the drawing. So I want to emphasize that this step of the drawing process, when we add our first layer of block in or mop in, it's still pretty rudimentary, quite frankly. So we've got quite a few steps to go after that to make a true kind of rendered or full finished looking figure that you might be looking for. But this particular technique, the block in or the mop in, when done properly, will give you speed. It will lay out the entire composition if you're also doing the background holistically, so that you can see everything start to come together clearer and cleaner as a total whole, and not as a jigsaw puzzled or piecemealed kind of drawing. So we want to see that come together again quicker and quite frankly to elevate your drawing practice to a much faster, relatable pace. Now, as I'm sketching in the proportions of the figure and the action and getting a little bit of the stool and the towel she's sitting on, then of course get her the right ankle and foot in the background. A couple things we want to be aware of. So the lighting on this is from Croquis Cafe Figures, which are wonderful, by the way. The lighting on the model here is from the top. We see that, and also from the left and a little bit in front of the model, meaning that the light is pushed closer to the viewer of where we're seeing the model than is the figure. So keep that in mind. That positioning is important. It tells you a lot about directional flow of the shadows, the shadow shapes that they make on the figure, and also quite frankly, equally the cast shadows that are made also onto the figure, and then of course the figure onto the floor. Now the figure is bathed in about half light, half shadow. There's not a ton of cast shadows. We see a little bit on the neck from her hair, and we also see some on her lower foot, the right foot, from the chair a little bit, and then from the buttock onto the towel a little bit too as well. So fleshing out rib cage in through here, getting the bottom part of the rib cage, feeling that contouring out to the buttock as it sits down. Gravity presses on the top, and then it's pushed down onto the sacral area of the pelvis and coccyx onto that chair, and makes that buttock, that right buttock area, poochy onto the glute where she's really getting pushed down. So we'll alter that in a moment as I get to it. Feeling the glutes as they come through, a little bit of the spine. You know, something else too I'm going to be talking about here is you can start to keep your structure simple, because you're going to block in and mop in those values after we lay in the linear shadow pattern, and that's going to relieve a lot of the detailing you might want to start to get into before you do that. So the lighting can give you structure. The shadow shapes can begin to also give you structure if you're using full value rather than doing a volumetric, anatomical kind of thing where we're drawing all those simplified volumes through there. So that's important to denote as well. So we're working through the hands here, a little bit of the hair. We'll keep that simplified as we're working downwards here. And so a lot of this is more shape oriented. It's a little flatter with the lay-ins. So your lay-ins can be a little bit more simple, a little bit more flatter, because you're going to use full value, and we're going to use block in and or mop in of the value to give us a little bit of the structure. So I spend probably even more time than I really need to through the shoulder and hand region. You can get to those contours pretty quick through there. I generally more of a volumist in the way I like to draw. Even these teaching diagrams, I generally tend to feel more like I like the volume. So I do a lot more of these, that motion right there with the eggy forms and block forms. And sometimes, again, with block ends, if you just get the shadow patterns, the structure comes alive without even having to do that. And you'll see that later on in a couple of drawings. I think the last two drawings that I do that are that are block-ins where I use a bigger piece of paper and a charcoal stick or a Conte stick with both of them, that the structure comes alive really quickly because I'm drawing a little bit less volumetrically. So that is something to be aware of. If you're not quite sure what I'm talking about yet, I'll try to make that clear as I go through. So now rendering out just this middle split of the spine. The spine comes down the middle back of the model, and then getting a little bit more of the tricep there into the end of the scapula shoulder, and the rib cage of the lat, and you can see where her rib cage starts to contract into the abdomen there, and also the oblique area moves up a little bit of a wrinkle there, roll. We all have rolls, even if she's pretty fit, so it's a little bit less so, but we all have some elasticity to our skin, so we're all going to get those rolls when we contract on one side. So getting a little bit of the hand. So, you know, again, you notice I'm just getting more of a shape here, and I do a little bit of volume, but it's kind of a V shape, and getting the elbow area, and then I'll bring down the forearm here a little bit. So hopefully everybody's enjoying their Oreo cookies too as well. Okay, I already ate mine. No crumbs, so that's good. So the elbow, and then getting the shape of the kind of the noodling of the elbow and the forearm as it V-shapes back into the shoulder region. Getting that attached onto there, and we're going to get that shadow shape, and you're going to see how much that gives it a volume later on. So I'm always concerned about volume, so you're going to see me do a lot of shadow shape type things, or volumetric, drawing forms. So I try to not do that as much when I do these block-ins, just to show you there's a couple of different styles I'll have going. So all right, so now what we're thinking about doing is the light source here, again coming from the top left with the directional arrows, and so the light is flowing across her like so. And now we're going to start to reach for our shadow shapes and find those shadow shapes. We can start to find them in the top of the hair a little bit where it's darker, so we can simplify all that. I know there's a lot of complexity, but even in this stage, blocking in is a very simple process. So we'll find some simple geometric shapes to get through there. Shape now in the forearm, we can see the shadow shape now, drawing the shadows linearly on the right arm, the shoulder region in through here, because we know the light's coming down through that region, so it's higher to the left. So we find that shadow shape, find the shadow shape, see where the hair ends, and then the cast shadow on the neck begins. So we'll lay that in linearly. I haven't blocked in yet. I'm just mapping in with a linear mark where the shadow shapes are. It's a very two-dimensional kind of approach here still. Find the center of the back, find that cast shadow shape. Okay. Now we're going to come across the right back to the scapula and find the shadow coming down the spine, delineating it linearly. I'm looking for the shape. It's a graphic kind of approach, almost like a comic book artist where they group all our shadows together. Look, I know there's a lot more complexity in there, but we'll get to that point after we do the very simple block-in of our shadow shapes. Okay, so we've got the spine split now. I'm looking for the shape now coming down on the left side of the back, moving down the rib cage a little bit more of an egg form, and then cascading down further to the oblique area, the lats, lower lat, and then down to the buttock. You can see how that makes more of a curve shape. We can see that shadow, the core shadow on the reflected light, but we want to simplify that. So I'm getting this contouring mark. See how I show you as I move across? It's a very contour. Kind of looks like this little simplified contour lines as I work my shapes too as well. I'll bring the buttock over a little bit and make it split a little bit further. We don't want to get too detailed. Find the dimples of the sacrum there, and the right glute right in through there. The sacral area fits in. It's really pushed over to the right. Okay, so we have that. So now we're going to find the rest of our shadow shapes with the leg that we see here, Get that thigh coming over, clean that up a little bit. It's a very rounded kind of form underneath. An egg form in the thigh, the grouping of the muscles there. Coming over, touching the knee, where it touches the tricep, the arm. There's a little shadow shape under there. Then there's a cast shadow shape. Do you see it on the leg made from the top part of her body? Right in through there as it casts over and it gets to be a form shadow. So we're delineating that linearly. We'll block those in a moment. So with this particular process, I'm going to lay in all the shapes first and then block in everything together. Later on, you can get quicker at this and you can lay in and block in together. So there are a few different approaches, and we'll as we get deeper into this video, I'll show you the differences between the two and how once you start to master this a little bit better, it goes a little bit faster. So we're getting this foot down the triangular part of that, the fibula of the ankle, and then the back of the foot here. Just getting that shape, that triangular wedgy shape, a little cleaner to read that. It's pretty tiny detail, it's not as important, so we're just getting that wedge, a little indication of the toes. There we go. We're almost set up to start our block in. Or our mop in. Mopping and blocking in, about the same thing. Okay, letting that foot nestle in there a little bit. There's a little shadow pattern in there, a little shadow pattern on the calf. Okay, right in through there. And then we'll address this stool a little bit here. Where the buttock sits down, scrunches down. Little cast shadow there, and then the little towel she's sitting on, we can get that shape pretty quickly and just get the gesture of that arching across. And then the right ankle coming downward. All that's going to be in shadow, so that'll get all blocked in together. Most of all that's grouped in shadow. There's rarely anything in true light. It's only highlight. And here it's on her hair and a little bit on the left upper thigh, or almost to the knee. You can kind of see that. But even that highlight is darker than the towel light. All right, so finishing out the line lay-in. Okay, a little bit of the hair here, and the bottom of the rest of the stool. So the block in, when you're working the process, it takes us a while to get there, but the block in happens really quickly. You should do it all together, and all of a sudden you've got this light and dark relationship that just starts to emerge. So we're moving that light through, showing the direction there, and now we're going to block in. So now we're going to take the top of the head, work a little bit more of this hair, and we're going to block in just a simple shadow shape, because you can see her hair is pushed away from the light source a little bit. And we're going to block in a little bit of the hand that most of it's covered up, the fingers with the hair, cast shadow of the hair coming down. We're going to block in that shape of the cast shadow of the neck. We don't see too much of the face. That can be a difficult little area to render faithfully. So she's mostly in shadow. Her face is in shadow and then covered up by the hair. Okay, so we have that coming down. She's kind of leaning over, hair leaning over. Now, blocking in the wrist, get that linear line cleaned up, and then we'll block in this shadow pattern of the hand. There we have our shadow shape delineated right in through there. It's almost like coloring in the lines right in through there. You know, just kind of contour and block that in. And shadow shape on the right side of the arm, because there it is, so I know where to put it, right in through here. There we go. Cleaning up my line work a little bit so we can block it. And when I'm ready, I just start to lay in the shadow pattern. And now I'm ready, finally. And there it is. Just block in one simple value, number 5 in the value scale, Oreo cookie. That's the dark chocolate area. The light area is, in this case, the skin tone here. Sometimes that can change, but you see that starts to give you volume. It's a very simple volumetric structure. And you can also come over here now, and as we're still continuing to read the light, and I'll start to block in the back. The same way, same value, same amount of value contrast. Don't get caught up in changes. I know there's more complex, and we'll get there. So I'm going to block in that shape. Essentially, it's very flat, still 2D, right? It's about finding that shadow shape and then laying it in and blocking it in with the value tone. It's a very simple value tone. It might seem like there's more, but there really isn't. There's just one value. And that's roughly, in this case, number 5 on the value scale. Then I can come back here on the chair, since she's casting some from the buttock and the shoulder here, and she's casting onto the stool, and so most of this I can pick apart a little bit of light of the cloth and then block it all in here. A lot of times you can block in all that and then erase back additive subtractively. We'll do some of that in another video as we spend a few videos on these techniques. So we get that blocking a little darker crevasse where the buttock sits in there. A little space between it. It's going to get pretty dark in through there. Block in the rest of the bottom of the foot. It's very much a shape. So there's a lot of structural things going on with that foot, more volume, but right now we're just keeping it into a shape. And you can see it emerging pretty well. Can you see the light and dark pattern emerging on her figure? So taking the shoulder region, the deltoid into the scapular region, and the erector spinae muscles coming up, but this little shadow shape is cast from the bone, the scapula, right in through there, and it gives it just that kind of rectangular curvy look to it. Then I'm going to come over and then I'm going to catch the arm gesture as well as the contour back up, and it's hidden, the hand is hidden back up into the hair, and catch that edge. And then you can see the shadow shape being made, the form shadow on this form right through there, and I'll block that in, taking care not to go too dark or too light right now. Then I'll block in the cast shadow here, laid right on the leg. Then a light foreshadow, form shadow on the leg, then some on the calf, so it's not too obvious, but I can block it a little bit because a little bit later on we'll get to some of that. And then the foot stays relatively the same. I'll block in a little shadow there, and then the back corner of the heel right in through there will go a little bit with the shadow, not too dark. Sometimes I'll change the value. I'll fudge it a little bit, I'll be honest with you, but for the most part they stay the same. What I'm not looking for is complexity in my value. What I'm looking for is to keep it similar and the same so that I can get complex later, because I want to see the entire figure emerge all together before I go into core shadow, reflected light, light and dark form shadow. So this becomes a much more manageable exercise, and it takes you quite frankly a lot less time, and that's something that we want to start to think about, is speeding up the process but yet being accurate as well. Now, background, we can start to block in background too as well, and so everything can works together like that Oreo cookie, right? So I'm going to delineate the spine just a little bit. I'm adding just a touch of core shadow just to give it a little bit more volume for you, but not a whole lot. But what we really also I want to show you here is to block in, mop in of the figure, but also the background tone too as well. So we see it in the first pass. We get not only the figure, but we get what is surrounding the atmosphere that's surrounding the figure. And there's where I'm going to get to that now. So with the same values, number 5 on the value scale, I'm just turning that charcoal pencil over to the side, and then starting to lay in my atmosphere. And that can get a lot more complex later on. It can go darker, it can go lighter, it can go modulated. There are many different things I can do with that, but we want to give contrast to the model's light, and that becomes the center of the Oreo cookie. The two sandwich parts of the cookie are I'm laying in now, and what is the light part is the model's skin tone. Even in darker models that are African, that can still happen. The shadows are generally darker in the atmosphere. Sometimes it can be a little bit reversed, but for the most part, that's true of just about every particular ethnicity in terms of what you see if you're drawing models, which is great to get in front of many different diverse ranges of figures and proportions, scale, as well as a skin tone value. And so right in between the negative space of the shoulder there and the model's hip, we have that negative space. Now, this is still pretty basic level of the model. There's a lot of steps to go to make this really pop and clean up, but it's a nice, I'd say, intermediate step in between, and even down in the foot we have that. So there's our first blocking of the figure, and we took all the stages of the model, and we figured out got the pose, the design line, the gesture, and then we started to linearly delineate where the shadows are, so that we can block in the shadow shapes and mop in the shadow shapes. Keep them simple. I'm going to render a little bit more hair here, and that could take a lot longer. I could go additive, subtractive, but just to make it just slightly more complex. Because the next stage after this will be to add coarse shadows in the future. That'll be another video as we go on to our next drawing here. All right, a little touch up. All right, so now for our next drawing here. So we'll do a lay-in, gestural lay-in, and get a little contouring going, and then we'll start finding the shadow shapes, and then do our block-in or our mop-in. So just, one thing to consider, think about when you're at this stage of a finished drawing or a sketch is the block-in stage is still pretty incomplete, quite a bit actually. It's just a beginning to separate the light side from the shadow side or the darker side only, so it's not meant to be a completion, although they can look pretty, I think, kind of beautiful on their own at times when they're at that state, but generally we take it on further to more of a finish, and that's essentially what we're aiming to do in the next set of videos after this one, which will be adding the coarse shadow and then reflected light refining, edge refining, cast shadows, and then onto detailing, and then a finish. So it's the overall, our overarching goal. All right, so laying in the figure, getting the gesture, the arched aspect of her back into the pelvis. You can see the lima bean area merging of the pelvic abdomen rib cage region, and then laying in the head, and then now contouring out part of the spinal area and the buttock, gesturing over the feeling of the leg, and then getting all those parts to work for us through here. Feeling the arm come down a little angled, and then over to the elbow, marking the elbow gesturally for proportion, and then on to down to the arm, forearm, and over. Pretty simple steps in here. Should have this relatively understood in your drawing practice by now. If not, keep working. There's no shortcuts in drawing to getting better or getting really good. People ask me that all the time. How long does it take? It can take 5,000 drawings, 10,000 drawings, 10 years. Generally, it's about 10 years of real strong, formal kind of practice. That's generally what happened during the Renaissance from a young artist like a Leonardo or Michelangelo, or a student they would take on in their guild or their studio, and it would take about 10 years of training off to fully kind of master that. And of course, the younger you start, the quicker you can get to mastery. So just keep that in mind. But it doesn't happen overnight, but it can happen if you've got the diligence and the discipline, and you have to have some natural affinity for it. It helps, but talent is only one part of the equation for an artist, and certainly for an art career. I've seen a lot of relatively mediocre students that I studied with for a while, and really pushed on to become pretty dynamic and pretty elevated in their skill set over a course of 3-4 years. You'd be surprised at what can happen. So I didn't consider myself to be a mediocre student, but maybe somebody would. But I certainly came in with a degree of knowledge and had a lot to learn as a student, and we still do. There's still things I'm picking up and learning, so it's pretty powerful too as well. So getting back to the actual drawing, as I rambled a little bit, we kind of gesturing in the foot, in the stool now. It's just very much a profile point of view, a little bit easier than some of the other ones in terms of its a little flatter positioning with the profile. So grabbing in the little footstool or the little chair stool that she's sitting on, just gesturing in, blocking in the direction of those feet of the stool, and then where the cross braces are, just to get a feel for that. Nothing special. So alright, so we're getting close to having the position in here, and I'm going to tighten up the contouring now a little bit. You generally do that before I block in. So now getting the arch of the scapula in the back, where that spine splits into a little bit, humps over a little bit, clearing that, coming down to the rib cage, and then on into the lower rector spinae, and on into the belly region here. Getting those folds. So this is not the block in yet, but it's clearing up of the contouring. You get it a little bit more concrete. That definitely comes next to feel that. And then I'll show you in a further drawing where this can be done more at the same time too as well. So we'll get that shoulder and through there. That spine of the scapula comes up to, starts to reach over to the clavicle. Now I'm blocking in a little. Now I'm coming over with the arm as I narrate here. Makes the sound better. So I've been doing the drawings without me narrating, which makes me go faster, which is nice. And then I can come back and overdub with sound, so it's kind of cool to have. And getting the contour of the elbow and the bicep tricep region and the side view of the arm. Definitely going to be a shadow there, so light source coming from the top and a little bit to the right in front of the model. You can tell by the cast shadow on the chair, and also from the feet over that it makes. So the light source is to the right, pushed a little bit in front of her. That's something to look for fairly early. You just want to be cognizant of that with your shadow shapes, and especially later on if you're working on figures and you're working completely from imagination, and you can put the light source anywhere you want, and you know where those light sources angle off to. Kind of an egg form for the forearm. So we take some great pains to clear up our contour a little further. So slow this down into the wrist, kind of blocky part of the wrist, and then we'll get the kind of the gestural contour of the hands and the fingers. Nothing too spectacularly detailed, more of just the flow of them. Just kind of a straight line for the gesture of the fingers into that pinky finger that's kind of arched over the top of the foot. Back palm of the hand down over. Grab her hair here, oval kind of shape, basically just getting the shape of it. This arch gesture coming through and the shape turning back into the pose. A little bit of a bang there, forehead right there. As it tucks back under the chin, tucks nicely up underneath to the sternum, and the hair coming wispily coming down. And getting the two legs. There's a second leg there through the cast shadow of the first leg and then the form shadow of the second. The very, very slight slither of that leg. And then we have the left leg here. Now sitting on the stool, it's going to get flattened right in through there and flatten up a little bit as gravity's pushing that downward, coming around to the hip pointer there, the trochanter, getting on that stool. And we'll clean up this towel that she's sitting on the stool. And the rib cage ends, the lat area. It's going to make that little cavity in there, the underarm area, breast form. It's a little higher, push it back higher up there. Just getting that split apart. Not doing any blocking in yet, not even laying in the shadow shape here. Just getting more of the contour set in so that the blocking in of the light and the shadow come really naturally over that quite clearly. And it makes it almost effortless, seemingly effortless. And work the heel area of the foot, calcaneus area. Just getting the shape of the gesture of that. Not worrying a lot about structure or beyond just shape structure. The wedging of that. And the flow of the toe in the foot as if it's almost in a sock. Just getting the outer boundaries of that. Okay. Alright, so now we're thinking about the laying of line for our shadow shapes. So now laying in the shadow pattern of where they fall. So finding that shadow shape and outlining it sensitively, thinking about contour there, bowling across the back as it flows downward across the back, right? You can see the rib by the 10th or 12th rib right in through there and then curving in. So just trying to find where that boundary line will be. Delineating, it's kind of like a border or a boundary. Or an edge, really, it's a soft edge of where those shadow shapes will be. So that's where they're falling, where I'm delineating there. And then you're going to see now on the buttock region, the light sources from above, right, a little bit to the right. So we're going to push all that. Found most of that. Coming back through the arm here. Getting this area cleaned up where the abdomen area is and the leg and through here. Get those shadows worked in and then finding the shadow shape of the leg, the cast shadow and the grouping of the legs together. So making those little kind of contoured, shorthanded contour lines just to show me direction of the form that's taking, and it dips in for the buttocks, so that gives me a contour direction, and it tells me also where to put my shadow shape when I start blocking in. So this is the lay-in of the shadow, still line as you can tell, but it's really almost like delineating where they fall in. It's almost as if it were a coloring book in a way, albeit I think a much more complex one of where those shadows are going to fall into these little shape pockets. So it's it was pretty revolutionary for me when I was a student in Los Angeles at Art Center, when I was shown that by my instructors, my professors. I never thought about it that way. I mean, I could render and I could shade, but it took me a lot longer because I'd never thought about a more efficient, systematic approach to doing it. And then when I was taught that, and I wouldn't say forced, but when we were required to make drawings that made that happen, it made it a whole lot more manageable and faster. Just got so much more efficient out of my drawing time, which was extensive, and so that helped. I spent a lot of time practicing, but also getting more efficient at the practice of drawing, which helped it quite a bit. So the foot behind the other foot and through there, we'll get that, and then I'll get the shadow shape on the floor where the stool makes a cast shadow onto the floor. Just get the basic shape of that, and then the stool is already dark enough and in the shadow that we can glide through that shadow shape as well too. So now I'm going to pick up a bigger charcoal pencil here, stick, so I can block in and go a little bit faster with that and mop in. I'm just going to start with the head that's all in shadow, and she's got darker hair anyway, so that goes really nicely. That all gets toned in one value. So we're going to stick with our mid-tone value, about a number 5 on the value scale, so she gets all blocked in there. The knee in through here, right? That's all in shadow, so we're finding our shadow shapes. In through here, light source coming from above, right? So now we can block all this in. The arm down where it is all going to be in light, bathed in light, value, and shadow. And we know this because we don't see the light there. We have a little opening here where the heel is, but everything else is going to be in shadow. And that doesn't tell the entire story. The entire story comes later when we start to separate all these little tiny sub-values from one another, and we get more rendering of the more full nature of the situation that we're drawing. But here we're we're blocking in, separating the light side from the dark side, and using that idea of the Oreo cookie, simple light, simple dark, in our basic beginning. And again, what this does through repetition, it tells us that we know what the form is now, and we know what kind of shadow pattern it's going to make, and we can see everything whole and clear and separative from its light side to its dark side. So you can see, I've delineated where those shadow patterns are, and I can fill them in quite nicely. So if I have a limited amount of time to sketch, I can use this technique and still get a complete lit figure that's obviously greatly simplified, but that comes together in a value sketch. And so I can just bring all of this value down even to the background, because the background is darker than just white. And so that was revolutionary for me when I was a student. It's like, wow, I can bring all this in together. So here we're going to have a core shadow there later on. That's a cast shadow there where I'm delineating, and there's a form shadow there. So that's a soft edge, where this cast shadow below will be a hard edge. And so you can, as a form shadow there, and then a cast shadow, form shadow on the leg, and cast shadow on the towel. And so we can manipulate those edges even in this stage pretty clearly already in just our block in by a softer form shadow and then a harder edge for our cast shadows. And that will also help give us an even stronger read on the form of the model and quite frankly, the true reality of the nature of what goes on in a drawing. Blocking in the shape underneath their cast shadow being made by the towel. Blocking in the stool, nothing special here. Just getting that mopped in. Mopped in or blocked in, both of them are fine. I like using mopped in a lot. It's kind of a more slang term. It's like mopping a floor or just sloshing it around. Just very simple, basic blocking. That's why I use a charcoal stick sometimes for these bigger ones. And I can go even quicker with it. You have to be careful sometimes with charcoal stick, especially if you're my students, is that I try to control that so it doesn't get out of control for you. Those can get out of control pretty quickly, but they're nice because you can do a broad area really quickly. And so now we're gonna just block in all this shadow shape into one tone and kind of use a gestural mark into here, and it gives us a nice area to block in. And of course the background tone, I can run that tone right into her any shadow areas because they're the same value, and just bring it up to the molecular boundary of her back and her buttock region. That's where that shadow ends, and then through here a little bit. I'll delineate just a little bit. Sometimes I'll do that. I'll go a little further just to show. And that's pretty much it. There's your block in for that figure. Right, so on to the next now. I'm going to show you with this one. I'm going to do gesture, lay-in, linear definition of the shadows, and a block in a little bit more as I go. It's a little faster, even though the video slows it. I'm slowing it down, but I want to just show you how, as you get more comfortable with this technique, you don't have to do them all individually, separately, and put them together. You can, but you can also begin to put them together more as you're just going down the figure in the model. So we'll start with the gesture of the head, leaning back a little bit. It's a lovely pose, really torqued here, twisted through the ribcage, abdomen. And then the high diagonal of the shoulder, with the right shoulder much higher. And of course the pose is stabilized by the left arm holding on to the heel. Feeling the flow of the lima bean, flow of the shoulder, getting the wispy definition of the abdomen, hip to the buttock region, and the center of the buttock is really pushed way over in this view. We can barely see the split of the buttock, the sacral area, just basically right in through where I marked it a little bit there. So it's really pushed over, and then high up because of the tilt. It's a lovely, wonderful, wonderful pose to draw. All right, so we move up to gesture. Of course, everything starts with gesture. Everything starts with rhythm and movement, design lines, and the flow. That's still more important than really anything else. And it's hardest thing to learn, I think, and also to teach. And coming down with just the gesture of the hand, down through the flow of the elbow to the shoulder and through. And feeling the gesture of the leg here. This first leg from the hip, locating the knee area to the thigh, to the lower thigh closer to the knee. Just feeling the abdominal curve of the thorax of the rib cage, and then the gesture now of the knee, the foot over to the heel. Trying to simplify that. I'm not trying to be cute by getting too detailed too early. That's a challenge for students, is not to get too detailed too early, but get that flow and see that diagonal, that line gets me all the way over to the leg, and I just check the distance by her elbow, raised elbow, and I know it's going to be longer in the leg than the elbow, quite a bit longer, right about and through there. And so that's where that leg will end, and we get a tapering of that form, gathering in the abductor part of the thigh into the knee, and then down over to the foot, which will hide substantially behind the knee, the thigh in this area. So that's pretty much the basics of the gesture. And I've got the gesture down as quick as we can get it here. Now we're going to go and start to contour around the model, and then also begin to contour and then lay in of my shadow shape and block in as I move down the figure. Once I confidently have a gesture and everything checks out okay in my design frame, in my mind, and my observational perceptual measuring, then I'm really ready to define the figure in a more finished concrete fashion. Sometimes the drawings I've done in this video are a little quite frankly awkward to me, the first couple, because of the separation of the steps I did. I don't generally draw that like that anymore, because I can do it as I go along, but that's not going to help somebody who's starting out or a little newer to drawing at all. So you kind of see these steps. But now, since you've seen it a couple of times, and you'll see it some more, I can add shadow shape and contouring definition and block in as we go along. So what I've done here is I'm essentially drawing less structure, and I'm drawing more for value shadow shape. If I was drawing for structure, I might draw the side plane of the head, more of the structure, the nose, the lips, but I know that's all going to be in shadow. And so I'm just going to get enough here to where I feel comfortable, where I can start laying my pencil down even more to the side and start throwing in some quick 50% value. Pretty close to doing that now. Working a little bit of the hair, cast shadow coming down the back of the neck. Excuse me. Where the hair is going to separate a little bit. Not that important, but I want to get a feeling of where I'm putting those shadow pockets in. So, light source coming now from forward and left and high through this range. Getting her eye socket in, a little bit of the eye, and I can delineate the lips a little bit later. And now it's time to lay in the shadow. And I'll start to block in the shadow where it falls. And so that area where her cheek, cast shadow of the ear comes around the jaw and the cheek area, I'm going to make that shape there. And then I block in her neck, cast shadow, form shadow area where the trapezius starts to come off the cervical part of the spine and onto the scapula and the clavicle, right in through there, and I can block that in. That's going to get filled in. And there we go. I block that in. Okay. So I'm doing it. You can do it more as you go. There's a shadow shape there. And of course, I'm slowing this down just for the sake of the practice. There's also, things about me and drawing and in these videos. These are very academic, almost like but they really are diagrams for drawing study, and they're relatively, I wouldn't call them art. I would call them diagrammatic teaching studies, and they're less about a style, and they're more about sublimating the style to find good drawing, a traditional kind of academic approach. And then what you do with that, these wouldn't be shown as my works. These are more teaching practice works. Just FYI on that. So getting the shadow shape of the back, where the spine supple and it changes and undercuts, and then there's a little bit of part of the scapula that comes through, but it's also reading the dimpled part of the shadow shapes. See how it can go down? Because I'm really working off, what am I working off now? I'm working off just the gesture. And it's less that volumetric figure, even though I'm thinking through the volumetric figure. So that's something to be considerate of. Light source here coming, shadow over there. Is that the volumetric figure that you should have already have under your belt and know about is now in my mind as I draw these forms. The buttock is a tilted block or a cylinder, higher to the left, lower to the right. Glute coming down, the left glute or butt cheek coming down, and then we get the tilt and turn of that split of the buttock where the sacrum is, where the glutes end and hang off of, and then they rest and split apart. A little shadow shape there, and then we'll split that further. Now I can throw even tonality in the background back there. So see how this is coming together more in it's a kind of a top down. And kind of finish as I go along rather than do it all, go back again, do it all, go back again. And then we'll take the glute and we'll split that from the left glute to the right, closest to us, very tilted up to the left, lower to the right as this comes down. Get that curve coming in, massive glute, medium and gluteus maximus muscle there. And now getting where the hip pelvic crest is there, iliac crest, into the leg, that straighter area, then it curves. Nice curve on through. So now I can come back and say, hey, there's the shadow shape pattern curving through, a little lighter there, and then I can see the curvature on the bowl-like form of the buttock and in the back. So I'm just delineating where that shadow shape is, where, and also of course where the light shape is, and drawing that boundary, but in a way that it shows me contouring, and then I can just take the fatter side of my pencil, lay it across. It's almost horizontal to the paper. It's almost laying flat. It's hard to tell in the video. But now I can contour and tone in and see how I can get light, edge, contour line, and a rudimentary block in all in one effortless system. It really is a systematic process or procedural process. And once you practice it, once it becomes almost involuntary, you don't even have to think about it anymore. It becomes like breathing or blinking your eyes, and you can draw anything you want this way. Then you decide, hey, do I want to keep doing this as a art practice? Is it a style I want to explore, or do you want to go on to do other things? And the decision I made as a student is once I mastered it to a good point, I still had things to learn. I wanted to go on and do other art, finished fine art practices, and others want to continue on this and apply it to illustration, which I certainly applaud and support. But this kind of drawing practice is so relevant for a many number of art practices: fine art, illustration, concept art, animation, design, graphic design. It's certainly a helper. It's not the end all, but for design. But it's great to have in your tool set. It's a long labor of love to get this drawing skill down. So now defining more of the contour of the arm or the breast emerges a little bit from the rib cage or off the rib cage, and then getting the contour of the end of the rib, the 10th rib, as it starts to come down and make that dimple, and then get into the abdominal area and then the oblique area. And then it makes it easier. You can see the shape now where I'm going to go. You can see this, and there it is. Once I get the shape, bingo. I can just start toning it in. But see how I can also tone and bring some of the background into the tone of the shadow, and that gives me an atmospheric
look to as well. I'll just give a little bit of structure there. So it gives you, with this technique of blocking in, you don't have to just block in the shadow shape, but you can block in the background at the same time. The other two videos, to me, were a little bit awkward and more stiff. I don't think they're as interesting drawings, and they weren't as interesting to do, the previous two. And oddly enough, I don't think they look as good as the ones that are upcoming, because I'm delaying some of the techniques that I've mastered and I've gone faster over to show you the separations. And so, however you ultimately want to do it, it's probably beneficial for you to look at those first two drawings that I just did previously in order to get those separations in your mind worked out, so that when you get this is probably kind of intermediate advanced blocking, where you're doing beyond the gesture, like I'm doing. I'm cleaning up the gesture, thinking volumetrically, and then contouring the volumes around the forms anatomically that I'm drawing, and then finding that lay-in line of my shadow shape, and then quickly blocking in. And sometimes you don't even need the shadow shape line. You just block in up to that. That's how fast you can go. But we want to slow this down for our students here at NKU, but also for YouTube land, so you can get a good feeling of how this works. And it works, remember, it works for any size. The two drawings I'm going to do after this one are going to be a little bit bigger, about a foot and a half, 2 feet maybe, and these are 18 by 24 inch size that I'm doing now. And so if you have a bigger drawing, the technique doesn't have to change, but the material size does. So here I am blocking in the atmosphere and the background tone all together of her wrist, which is a little bit more blocking, than her forearm, which is a little bit more of an egg form. Now coming back and reconfiguring my gesture, repositioning that if I need, finding the boundary of the knee. This is a different drawing technique than if you look at the anatomy videos, which were more about structural over accurate lining. So there's a lot of anatomy going on, for instance, in this thigh, this upper thigh, the abductors, the sartorius coming through, and all the quad muscles that are coming through, the four of them there. But we don't need all that. What we need is just tone. We've got a contour shape, and then I just put down a quick tone over that, kind of a contouring atmospheric tone. I'll soften that up in a little bit. The same thing here with the leg. We get the feeling of the form of the calf and the soleus, and get their contour edge coming through, slightly flexed and tilted into the cropping of where it disappears behind the leg, and then it's a shadow pattern. So it's all together. When it's all in shadow, the contours of that leg become the shadow pattern. I don't think I could say it better than that. So when it's completely in shadow. So get it behind the thigh here, a little fat gathered right in through there. Dimple down a little bit, and then we get the major egg form of the grouping of the biceps femoris and the quad muscles there. That tendon coming down, bulge in through there, which is going to be in light, and then the shadow pattern. There's the laying of the shadow shape. I'm going to contour. It's going to fall this way over that egg form, and then kind of gently fall down gracefully the leg of the model. Feel that in. So I've got to finish this leg before I put the foot behind it. But the gesture's there, so I don't have to rethink that, because I know the position is correct. Once I have the gesture, even that from here, the knee to that heel where her hand is on, that's enough to tell me that that's accurate looking at what I'm seeing. So I can put all that together, and I can go back here and say, okay, that foot, she's on her big toe, pushed up, so we get to see it flatten
We don't see the heel really raised up. So it's kind of a bald foot, a little bit tilted toes here. So we're just really in this position. I'm just trying to think of simplifying my structure there so I can get the profile of the foot, because I know I'll just throw it in shadow. It's kind of an awkward view. And then I'll put tone over that, make it a little bit more atmospheric, and see how I can just gather it and put it all together. See, I just group that all together. Atmosphere, background, and the whole form is in shadow, so there's no need. I see a lot of students, they'll render in the leg or the thigh here, and then they'll put in the background tone separately. Do it all together like a wash, like a watercolor, and you'll have it all together. Bulge of the calf coming down to the lower leg soleus part, to the Achilles. I just want to get the shape of the heel to the foot. Not worried about separating all the structure because it's a quicker sketch here. Getting that bulge. And then we're going to come in and finish off the shoulder here. We've got the gesture that this couple of lines rhythmically placed tell us where we're going. And then we'll come back with the lower arm, upper and lower arm, measuring across where the elbow is, about where the sacrum is, or her thigh is in front in the pelvic region. So we get the condyles of the elbow there to work for us. And so we know our light source is from the left in front, so it's going to push that shadow shape over a little bit to the right. Not quite in the middle, but over to the right. Bulge of the shoulder, the deltoid there. And now we can block all that in. Look how simple that is. Starting from the shadow shape and working through and into the atmosphere. See how I can use that atmosphere and I can bring it all the way down and bring it against the edge of the buttocks, bring it against the edge of the thigh, and even put in the circle of the platform that she's sitting on. It's a nice turnstile that they have. Croquis Cafe, if you haven't used their video references, they're great. Donate to their site when you can. Those of you that are, especially in YouTube land, if you're using Croquis Cafe, please donate a little bit of money. These videos are free. You don't have to send us money. We're doing these as public service, but they're a business, and they're providing a lovely support reference, video reference, photo reference for artists. So please, when you can, donate to Croquis Cafe, $1 a month, whatever you can. So, and I have no affiliation with them. So blocking in that shadow form, and there's one shadow we still need to get to, which will be the thigh area. Working off that heel. You know, in these short-handed kind of sketches, we're just looking for that shape a lot of times, and then later on we can delineate structure over that. Sometimes you work too much into the structure of a small area, it becomes a little too heavy-handed. Getting that thigh worked, and then the calf worked, and finding the shadow shape there, and the calf overlaps the thigh there in the knee area. Getting it to sit down. Cleaning all this up a little further. And putting some background tone in there. Let's see if I forget that thigh. I might. Bringing in the atmosphere. I could have done that earlier, but we separated that out. So bringing in some atmosphere back here, kind of rhythmically. Very sketchy. Filling in the pocket of that ear just a little further, just to tweak out a few things here. Not too much further. Let's see if I forget that front thigh shadow. I think I did. Looks like I did. Little shoulder. Downward to the buttock. Over across the buttock, just getting a little bit more contouring there for a basic block in. And there we go. Yep, I forgot the thigh. How about that? Oh well. So we'll go on to the last two here, and these are going to be bigger. So I'm working this size is about 2 feet by 3 feet, 24 by 36 inches. Those of you that are using inches, those of you that are not, sorry about the metric system part of it that we don't use here in the States. So you get the idea now how much larger this is. The camera's pulled out, and I'm drawing exclusively with a charcoal stick here. So working in the gesture, it's a little bit more of a straighter kind of angular gestural approach, and it's really broad, and I'm blocking in a little bit as I go. So the light source coming from, where's our light source coming from? So it's coming from the right over here, and it's pretty much to the side of the model, but a little bit in front, and it's not that high. It's about, since he's crouching, it's about where his head is, the major part of the heat of the lamp or the power of the lamp. So it's a little lower in this situation. It gives a nice long cast shadow back to the left. So light source to the right. So figuring out some of the gesture, getting a little bit of the contour outside very lightly of the model's pose as he's crouched a little bit with that cane, that pole, and moving on in and over. And then getting the buttock in through here. And see, I'm already blocking in. So even in the gesture. So now I'm going faster with my mop in and my block in the gesture aspect of it. Even goes faster. So I prefer doing this when it's appropriate for me to do that in teaching. And other times we have to slow it down, which is why we're here doing it. So the gesture, and then you get a very simple gesture, and then the block in. There's lots more complexity going on with that leg. All the quad muscles, the hamstring area muscles is where lower leg muscles were. Forgetting all that, we're just looking at shadow. We're looking at rhythm, movement, gesture, scale, proportion, and then light and dark value. And then once you get the light and dark value shapes to work, that also gives you the volume. So we're still thinking about the volumetric figure, but it is in a different capacity that we're doing it. Keep that in mind. Gesture there. Gesture, all that's in shadow. That can already start with the tone once I get a simple contouring outlined idea. Notice I don't do heavy contouring. I don't want to get there because I want to be able to manipulate that contour line into lighter and darker, thicker and thinner lines for my drawing later on. So that's not stiff. Then we'll just get the back of the shadow and the line of the wall to the floor, and you've got a lot already there. And then we can spend some time really getting in there to the shadow shapes and getting them a little bit more specific to the drawing. So now working up the back, now I'm taking greater pains to kind of stop where the contouring is, or the ends of the form of the model, and delineate delineate where they're at, where the buttock is, and through here coming down to the left glutes and on over toward that stretched and pulled a little bit, the spinal area coming down, the sacral area right in through there, the tip of that, where the split of the buttock is. And then the next part of the glute pushes way over and lower. So if you look at the entire drawing as I'm working it, you see a gesture there, a rudimentary gesture, but you also see a very rudimentary block-in starting together. This is a great technique for painting. If you were using a brush and a wash of thinned down oil or acrylic or watercolor, you can block in very quickly. Well, sometimes what you need though is you need a contrastier lining setup. So this is harder to do a lot of washy block in or block in very gesturally if you don't have a lot of value contrast, and sometimes you don't want that for your expression. Working in the contours, the tendons coming down of the leg and then coming back up to the buttock as it curves around to the iliac crest and over to where the oblique is here. And notice I've blocked in as I'm going along, blocking in. I found the shadow shape here. The general shadow shape, where the darkest, there's muscles coming through, those quad muscles coming in. Vastus intermedialis there, lateralis, tensor fascia lata, all that is coming down, iliotibial tract, but I'm worried about the major shadow shape underneath, where the major part of the leg form is. So this is the boundary underneath leg where the hamstring, biceps femoris curls back in and attaches to the fibula there. That's important, sure, but the shadow shape on top of that, which I'll get to in a moment as I block it in, will be important. So coming across the top of the leg here, and then there's that block in, and then block in with a lot more atmosphere. See how I can bring that all down? That's all. Like, I'm going to go ahead and do all that too. I would have done it earlier, but let's do it now. Blocking in, you can get this done faster. Shadow shape, very flat, two-dimensional approach. Where his rib cage hits into that oblique, there's all that's in shadow. See, I can just throw it all, and I lose the edge a little bit, and that's totally fine. I can go back and I can see the gesture through it, but all that's in shadow, so all this is in shadow. See, that's going really, really quickly. Push him in shadow. What I mean push him in shadow is pull those forms back out of the light. Then I go back and find my quick contour here, and I'm trying to be a little bit more careful and be a little bit more sensitive to light thickness and thinness and darkness a little bit as we work it through. Coming across the top of the rib cage here and up to the shoulder, all around. Bring it up to the neck. So you can see how this is emerging really, really much quicker. And this drawing is big. It's twice as big as the others, which is a little fresher way to do it, which I prefer to do, is you combine it all together. Shoulder here coming down, delineating where it attaches over here to the scapular area, then comes off the lats to the lower arm, to the tricep, getting the contouring shape. You can see I have a blocked in gesture. Now I can work on top of that to clean up the edge, getting to the elbow, right? And then finding where the elbow is about where the end of the forehead is. pointy elbow in through here, coming across, working over the shoulder, feeling the movement across to the deltoid there of the shoulder, if you will, that sort of oval shape, and then form. And I've got a block in already kind of there pretty well. You can see that coming through. And into the bicep, slightly flexed there. Still very simple. This is still very early in the drawing rendering process. Keep that in mind. All of these are still fairly crude. All we're doing is separating light from dark, and there's quite a bit of fine-tuning that will happen or can happen if you want after this stage. So don't leave the videos thinking, well, that can't be all there is to it. That's so unfinished. You're right. You're correct. It is. This stage is, to me, one of the most interesting tells of what a student can know. If the student can do this pretty fast, is separating the light from the dark. If they can see this stage really well and then throw in their core shadows, I know they can go on to do a really resolute and compelling finish to their drawings once they start detailing. If they can't yet, I can tell it's going to be a struggle for a while. So I'm getting, the hands are clasped together. That's a really detailed area. I'm just gesturing the shadow and finding the shadow shape where they come together, and that separates them enough to put them into a light side and a dark side. Go right back to that Oreo cookie. Light side, dark side. Dark outer, lighter in. There's a boundary between them, and that gives you illumination in a simplified way. Blocking in the hair shape, which is the same as the shadow shape. Don't change your value. Now is not the time to be complex with your value. We want to go one value. And that's something to think about with all these drawings. You notice again how raw they are and unfinished, partly because the value system is only one. There's only a system of one, or two really, a light and a dark, a number 5, and the wide of the paper. And of course that could be changed if you use additive subtractive drawing, which we can do in another video after this when we add core shadow. We'll look at that technique in tone paper as well. I think all these are on newsprint. So I'm just getting the basic structural elements of the eye socket that's mostly in shadow, a little profile, the face, the neck, the nose, the mouth, nothing too detailed here. Getting the shadow shape now of the lower arm, tricep region, and the block into the elbow to make that work, and then blocking in the atmospheric now quality of everything else since it's the same value. And then we'll get this knee cleared up a little bit to the edge of the patella. You can see where I've got the gesture already. I'm just going to alter a little bit. I've already got even a block-in gesture where there's some shadow on the shadow side. The calf's going to get more egg-formed. Pull out a little bit. Right in through there. There's the shadow side coming down to the ankle, which will probably go, looks like it's going to go lower than what I've got it. Fibula ending there, bulge of the calf, downward to the soleus, and then it's going to go lower, so I can just get the gesture of the triangle of the foot, which will be slightly off the page, probably a little bit more. And I'll just leave that, and then put a little bit of tone back here, and that's pretty much it. And there you go. That's another block in, Layin block in. How quick that went, and with a much bigger drawing utensil. All right, so there's our photo. I was going to say, do I have to go back and edit? It would help if I get the photo in. There's our photo. So we have a nice lounging pose here, female figure. And again, a pretty large surface to draw in. I'm going to use I'm using the Conte crayon stick. Conte is wonderful. It's a little chalkier, but it has a slight waxy component to it, so it's not quite as smudgy as charcoal, even though it's pretty close. But it's a pretty big stick, and I've got it in a pencil holder so I can use the fat part of it. It's pretty small, so putting it in that holder helps. You can see that the black part of it underneath my palm area. So now we're going to gesture in the head region and on down through the abdomen here, and obviously through to the buttock as we go further here. Just getting the major quick components of her scale and proportion. Laying in the tilt of the breast forms. Again, these stages, this drawing will end pretty unfinished, but there'll be a structural look to it of a light and dark. The structure's there. The volumetric figure is there. It's underneath it. It's very ephemeral, meaning that it's not the kind of volumetric figure that we've been practicing. But in my mind, I've used it in order to gauge where her forms turn and change and where planes and angles and 90 degrees change. So it's all there. So we're getting more advanced as we're moving through the figure section and starting to use gesture, rhythm, movement, scale, composition, proportion. The volumetric figure is sublimated so that we can lay in our contour boundaries, then lay in our shadow definitions through line, then we can block in our shadow shapes. And we're going to get to a intermediate complex step of drawing the figure relatively quickly, because we're not drawing for volumetric figures anymore. We're drawing for a more finished look. Finished sketch look. So we work it through here. So now up through the thigh, getting the gesture of the thigh. The knee is about just slightly higher than the model's nipple area. So a little bit. See, I can bring that line over. That's a horizontal alignment line. Sometimes I'll just throw it out there if I need it, just to make it clear where it's at. Knee comes up till the joint, to the patella region. Again, we have another video section on horizontal, vertical, and diagonal alignment, and that's something that is a constant in drawing practice to use. It's such a subtle technique, but we probably need to do a better job of all professor artists that are practicing artists and teachers of making sure students are understanding that horizontal, vertical, and diagonal alignment is a key structural, two-dimensional, grid-like guideline to help with scale and proportion. So I'm doing a little block in here as I come through the cast shadow of her chest and hair onto her leg. Just a little bit there when I want to. That's all going to be in shadow. Really everything on her abdomen, her breasts, except for the top breast closest to us would be her right one, is in shadow. It's got a little bit of a light pocket there as well. So all that'll get bathed in shadow in a moment. So it's a very shorthand kind of drawing. It's very much contour and then tightening up the boundaries, some inner contours where forms overlap, and then a block in pretty quickly. This is a great, these are all of these techniques will help you in painting as well, painting the figure academically or more traditionally as you're learning. Because generally in a lay-in of a painting, if you're sketching in oil or even if you're sketching in charcoal or whatnot on canvas, you're not going to go in generally with a session, like an 8-hour session study of a very detailed drawing. You want to get the major structural, rhythmic composition contours and then get to the painting part of it, just kind of what this is doing. So you can see where I blocked in the light on her, the shadow and light on her neck. The whole head, her whole face is in shadow. So all that. Then there's the structure of the head, and then there is the shadow of the head. Same thing with the hair, that's going to be in shadow. It's darker mostly. And you can see where the delineation of the left side of the neck separates that out. So I put her all in shadow before I even given her a profile. She's pretty much a blunt piece of clay right now. There's a shadow shape on the deltoid of the shoulder. You probably could have scrunched that shoulder up a little. She's kind of squeezed. It's contracted up. That could probably be delineated further. That's something I would probably change. I don't think I do it in this sketch. That's okay. And then the tilt of the elbow coming down, the boundary of her arm here to her hand, and then finding the shadow shape, simplifying the shadow shape, and getting it all laid in. That's mostly in kind of a shadow here, and then that little area past the pectoral, underneath the pectoral where the breast is, curls around as a cast shadow. But in between her arm and her breast form, and then the shadow tends to stop around the breast as the breast protrudes outward, and it curls around the breast, and it becomes a form shadow underneath, right in that area. Delineating the leg. Back to the hand a little bit and just get the major gestural parts here of the hand just to get its outer boundary shape. It's not about high detailing right now, it's a block in. And a quicker one at that, especially this size and scale. Go downward to the leg where the knee and joint ends the leg, and then we'll come out to that boundary to the thigh and back of the hamstring area to the buttock. She rests on that surface. Getting that shadow shape, right? There it is, right there. And we're going to block all that in, I assume, here. Shadow shape on the stool and cloth that she's laying on. I could have gotten that too, but I delayed that. So we have up to the leg, to the knee. The leg very much becomes kind of a blocky cylinder, and you can tell where the shadow shape is, where the side plane of the knee is, and into the lower thigh. We need to get the boundary of this outer leg to end that. Some point in time. Raise the head up a little bit here. So a lot of times I'll do that as I'm working, and as I see things throughout the figure, I'll jump and check and change as I step back and look at one area to the other. It's like adjusting the larger, broader picture to when I fine-tune one area, then I can go back and change it. Because the head is such an important iconic region to make sure you have proper adjustments on that. So I'm always looking at that size of the head. Now I can get the gesture of the leg. Nice quick rhythmic line all the way down to about the ankle. Into the contours of the calf, into the upper part of the lower leg here. Tibia region, sorry. And most of that's going to be in shadow. Really all of it is at that point in time. There's some secondary reflected light, so I can bathe all that in shadow shape. And of course, I could have gone on with more atmosphere around her top and on the area where the chair is kind of covered up. We'll get to that in a moment. But all that can be in a shadow shape, and then we'll get this lower leg to finish out this block-in sketch. Rudimentary, still very rudimentary, but pretty fast. These techniques, hopefully you're starting to get how you can get a laid-in figure in 10 or 15 minutes at various sizes and scales pretty fast and get complex in a short amount of time, so you have quite a bit of time to render more complex lighting situations, coarse shadows, reflected light further, and then getting into more detailed structure. So the outer contour of the foot on over to the ankle, and just getting the wedge of the foot over. Triangular wedge is enough for showing what we have there. All that's in shadow can be bathed in shadow. Greatly simplify this for now. Just bathe that in shadow. And we'll finish out some areas where we can add a little bit of the chair. Here I'm getting a feel for where that comes across horizontally about under her chin or right around the chin, in between the nose and chin. Get that chair just to get a full composition. There's a big shadow shape. I can use that. That helps define further what that towel covered chair is doing. And now I can just give a little bit of profiling to the head. Not a whole lot of information is needed, but I'll get a little bit of the cheek structure, ear, hair definition, where that changes a little bit, and then a little profile where the brow is there, and as it comes into the socket and then back out to the nose and cheek and chin. But not a lot for blocking. That comes at another time as we start to go deeper into the specifics of the drawing. Just a couple more minutes here. You can see just the generalities of her form start to emerge, keeping in line with the structure. I'm getting a little bit more complex with the values, so I can just pull them out a little bit, because most of her total head is in shadow, but most of that's reflected light, because the direct light is on the neck and on the back of her head, and it's where her darker hair value is a little bit lighter. Just enough to pop in a few features just to show you what a block-in can look like. And again, the value range here is very simplified. If you, again, compare the image to what we're drawing and what I'm doing here, it's a greatly reduced value situation. It's about a block-in, separating light side from dark side, and it's not about a complete complex separation of multiple values. There's a lot more complexity happening on the model, on the image, than what we're getting to, but we'll get there. And this is the step of true atmospheric rendering, and the first step of value boundary separations. And so that's pretty much it. So these images will be at the back of this video, and you can use them as reference. All right, we'll see you guys.